Happy Hanukkah and Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Hanukkah Sameach, I guess. I don't know. I trust that Hanukkah has been fun so far, right? Right? Yes. And of course, the party continues in just a little while downstairs. But of course, we love to light the candles and spin the dreidel and retell the story of the Maccabees, of course. And of course, everyone's favorite part, eating latkes and sufganiyot, right? And gelt. Don't forget the gelt. However, I do wish that they made it in dark chocolate. Amen? Anybody with me? Yeah, amen. Probably only exists in the land itself, right? But you know, Hanukkah is more than fun cultural tradition, and it's in fact more than just heroic history as well. There is rich spiritual application to be derived from the holiday of Hanukkah because it too, like the other Jewish holidays, it offers us revelation about God. And God is to be found in so many ways in the Hanukkah story, but I find that one of the biggest revelations that Hanukkah teaches or reminds us about is that God is the God of hope against all odds. God is the God of hope against all the odds. And we need such a reminder, not just because of the days we're living in, but because we need reminders of hope, and we need them often. And this is what Hanukkah, in fact, invites us to remember and reflect upon. Remember Zachor, right? Chingy, I know you remember. Because Hanukkah is, in fact, not just about dedication. It's also about hope. In fact, when our dedication begins to falter, it's because our sense of hope is somehow weakened or wavering. So when was the last time that you remembered that God is the God of a real hope, a powerful hope that goes against all the odds and all the opposition, which, by the way, are also real and also powerful? But the Lord, He is the great, mighty, and awesome God, the Most High God, Adonai Tsevaot, the Lord of hosts. He is the God of wonders and the God of miracles. And we get to know Him in these names by His mighty hand and outstretched arm that subdues the odds and defeats the opposition and the odds that are against Him and against His people. And you know, God has in fact always made Himself known in this way, and His promises known in this way. And the Jewish people know this better than and longer than anyone else. Not just in the story of Hanukkah, with the miracle of the Maccabees winning against the Greco-Syrian army, who were in fact far mightier and stronger than the ragtag Maccabean army, right? Or the miracle that Jewish identity was in fact not assimilated into Hellenism and Jewish worship was not completely snuffed out. Or even the miracle of the lasting oil. These Hanukkah miracles are consistent with the revelation of the God of hope against all odds that actually goes all the way back to the very beginning, the genesis of Israel's story. You see, this is how God first revealed Himself to Abraham when He called him out of Ur to risk everything and believe in His promises that went against all the odds of survival and blessing. This is how Sarah got to know this God of hope and wonders when He fought against the odds of her old and barren age, and she conceived a baby at the age of 91 years old. The birth of an entire nation through Abraham went against so many odds, and that's what made it miraculous. And the fact that the Jewish people have survived to this very day, surviving generations of exile and assimilation and even anti-Semitism, to now finally return and thrive in their own land again. We can't even conceive of all the forces, all the odds, and all the opposition that factor into all of that. And more importantly, just try to imagine the power to withstand those odds, to preserve an ancient people against centuries of intense, opposition and vulnerability. It truly is a wonder of wonders and a miracle of miracles. This is how all Israel was reminded about who their God was back in Egypt, when the odds were most definitely not in their favor. Time after time, Pharaoh rejects Moses' plea and refused to let Israel go, as we know. And they kept running into horrible odds and bad luck. But by God's mighty hand and outstretched arm, he subdued the laws of nature themselves in order to perform the impossible, the unthinkable, and the miraculous for his people, like splitting the sea so that even the waters defied the natural laws of gravity. He makes the odds to be in our favor. You know what I mean? Even the Gentiles in the Bible who encountered the God of Israel encountered exactly this characteristic about God. Ruth experienced the God who goes against the odds of poverty and loneliness, loss and grief to not only provide for her, but to go above and beyond in blessing her with a son to the Davidic line itself that would produce the Messiah. King Nebuchadnezzar, let's talk about him. In Babylon, he really experienced the mighty hand of God, of the God of Daniel, right? It was God's power that both humbled him to graze like a cow in the field for 7 years, and who also lifted him up out of that insanity and restoring him back to health and kingship. So think about what powerful odds exist there, but what greater power to subdue those odds. But of course, one of the places where we really see God taking total control of all the odds is in this week's Torah portion. And it only took me a page and a half to get here. But once in a while, it's important to see the greater context in order to really grasp the consistency of our God's character. Joseph was a man who was constantly vacillating between the odds that were against him, and then suddenly favor, right? Over and over again, there's tragedy, favor, tragedy, favor. That's the story of his life, right? He gets rejected and sold by his brothers as a slave, but then quickly gains the favor of his master. Then he gets rejected by that same master because of false accusation and gets thrown in prison. But then he gains the favor of his jailer and gets put in charge. Then there's a chance for him to finally get out of jail with the cupbearer whose dream Joseph interprets, but alas, the odds are against him again. The guy forgets all about Joseph. And then finally, after 2 more years, that's what the text says, 2 whole years, God gives Joseph great favor by making him the only one in Egypt able to interpret Pharaoh's dream against all the other sorcerers and magicians. Then God multiplies that favor by making Joseph second in command over all Egypt. So now we see the bigger picture of how God worked out all the details and all the odds to actually be in Joseph's favor. Similarly, God doesn't waste the years that the odds are or that the odds feel against us. He always has something better in mind, just like he did with Joseph. God is in the business of redeeming. He always redeems the years that the locusts have eaten. The nature of redemption itself means to defeat the odds that stand against us and to take what was meant for evil and work it out for good, a good that is in fact far greater than what you ever possessed in the past. God is always in control of the opposition in our lives. And again, he fights. He fights for us. He fights for his people. He really is for us, even when he himself seems to be against us. God is for us when the world is against us, when circumstances and other people are against us, or when the odds are just not in our favor. He makes them to be. But the favor didn't stop there with Joseph. God eventually reunites and reconciles him with his brothers and the whole family again, right? I can imagine at that time, the odds of that reconciliation happening probably seemed impossible from Joseph's perspective, from his brother's perspective, and even from Jacob's own despairing perspective. Think about it. From a human perspective, Joseph probably thought he would never see his family again, let alone forgive his brothers. But the fact that against all the odds, reconciliation did happen proves that God always has the biggest big picture in mind and works miracles to make it happen. And well, speaking of the bigger picture, Joseph's story actually comes with an even bigger picture and prophecy that just cannot go unmentioned. Because one day, God will cause all Israel to reunite and reconcile with Yeshua, just like he caused Joseph's brothers to reconcile with Joseph. One day, all Israel will behold him whom they have pierced, just as the brothers bowed before Joseph, whom they rejected and cast into the pit. And so all Israel will believe and be saved. Those are some big and powerful odds to work out there.
Amen.
But God's mighty hand and outstretched arm is far bigger. And it's bigger because Yeshua has already subdued and defeated the last and the ultimate odds of sin, Satan, and death. All the powers of the fall since the Garden of Eden, guys, and all the powers of darkness in the cosmic places that fight against God and that fight against his people. Yeshua now works all that out for the greater good of his people and his Father's kingdom. And he did this by the ultimate power, forgiveness of sins, which, according to the Tanakh, is God's ultimate fight against the ultimate odds. God proves his love for us in this, that while we were yet still sinners, Messiah died for us. While we were still weak and powerless and without hope, Messiah died for the ungodly. This is a hope that sees us at our very worst, at our most hopeless state, when in fact the odds are most against us. And it doesn't give us what we deserve, but instead it loves us and it forgives us, and he dies for us in our place. So Yeshua fought and conquered the worst odds and our worst opposition, thus proving that he is himself the God of hope against all odds. So in closing, let's remember that when the odds are not in your favor, that's okay, because you have something way better than fortune, way better than luck, and even better than the natural order of this world. You have the God of all hope who outwits the odds and the opposition in your life for your good. Again, a good far more glorious than you can imagine. So like with Joseph, the Lord will always give you a mountaintop as high as the valley was ever low, and favor as strong as the odds were ever against you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.